All right, guys, we're going live. Ready?
Yes.
3, 2.
That was a cute smile, Roseanne. I bet they caught that on the camera. Smiling at the grandbaby. That was fun.
I was gonna have only my boots on for me, just have my feet,
Oh yeah.
on the side of the camera. But then I thought, well, I thought that'd be funny. But then I thought, well, I better show my face.
Well, you know what?
But I like that y'all got a good pair of boots on. I like your boot collection. It's very cool. I like your car collection too. It's very cool.
You like my bike?
I do. Oh my God, I love it. Is that a Schwinn?
It's an actual 57 Firestone Super Cruiser. So that was like the bike. Oh. It's an original. It's got just a couple of parts that are remanufactured. I think the front springs up here, and then the springs under the seat. But the rest of it's all the original.
Is it a Schwinn?
Well, it's called a Firestone, and in fact, he had it all painted back at the factory, and that was like 15, 20 years ago. So it's like, and it's been maintained ever since. So it's actually a very, very rare bike, and very fun.
I love those pinstripes. It's like two.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
I guess it's two different. Well, 2 or 3 sizes. Gorgeous.
It's actually a fun segue into the show we want to do today. The movie was this trek across America. Going back to Washington, D.C., and when President Trump had asked the American people to come be present when the vote was the Electoral College was done there at Congress on January 6th. And I was actually on my...
What the hell happened? I mean, I saw The Called.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. Was a good movie with a good message, showing good people trying to be there for other good people in a good cause in our country. But what in the hell went on and what the hell's going on with the whole, what is going on? What happened that day?
Well, we weren't planned. The American people did not show up to do violence. In fact, that's what The Called shows, is the people that were present that day. And they were there to be counted, but they weren't there to do violence. That was people doing a false flag. And in fact, even the FBI, and even the FBI, even the FBI has had to back off on this whole idea that there was some intent for an insurrection. I mean, the people that were doing this whole breach of the congressional building, false flag actors. I've talked about that several times now, and to try and misconstrue us as these insurrectionists. They were there. The people were there to be counted, and as time goes on, that's the way this is going to be understood and seen, I believe. But
I'm just asking you, why did Trump invite people to come? That's what doesn't add up or make any sense to me.
Because this
had something in his mind that didn't end up fitting what happened.
President Trump, this was the vote when Congress was going to certify the election. There was all this question of whether or not the vote was valid, whether or not there was fraud involved. And for all the talk that, Arizona, the fraud didn't exist, and the count's the same now as it was then. No, the count's the same. The question is, now we move to the next level, which hasn't been released yet, but will here shortly. The forensics. Were the ballots that were counted, were all of them legitimate legal ballots? They had ballots that were printed on 8.5 and 11 paper in copy machines. Those were not valid ballots. They have ballots.
Well, I thought the whole issue was that those machines were not supposed to be accessible to the internet, because then anyone could log on and change the vote count. And that, to me, was what the whole thing's about. They said over and over again, Dominion and them, they said, no, these were never hooked up to the internet. So, you know, it's been proven over and over again, including by their own admission, that that was an untrue statement, that they had indeed been hooked up to the internet. So that proves right there that they lied and that there's fraud. So how many times do they have to prove it? And also just this, as far as common sense, which to me is what's being outlawed in our country, is common sense. That is what is being outlawed. It's illegal to have common sense or to work for the common good of the common people.
Yeah.
But for people to actually think after all the polls they've been doing all this time of right to life and what people's actual opinions on abortion are, from the gamut from the far left to the far right, most people of all those groups are against live birth abortion. Most of people in this country.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that 85% of the voters, or 85 million voters, rushed out to vote for that, to vote for Biden, and that right there, that proves that it's fraudulent. I mean, did you see that out?
Now they've admitted that the test program on the shot, which isn't, by the way, it's a mRNA modifier. It's not a vaccine by any classical definition, but that test program did include cells from fetuses. Well, obviously, if they're cells from fetuses, they mean from aborted children. So what purpose did tissue or cell material from aborted fetuses have doing in the test program? And then others have asserted that it's also in the shot that was actually released. Well, that hasn't been stated or proven that I'm aware of yet. But if it was in the test program and then let's say you removed it, then how does the shot you released to the public resemble what was done in the test program? Whatever the test is supposed to be what the actual end thing that goes out. And of course, we know that it was not approved by the FDA for human use. It's still in the classified as an experimental drug, and then compelling or forcing people to take it is a violation of the Nuremberg Code. This is going to blow up in people's faces that are pushing this, and it's not that much further down the road. And of course, anytime you talk blood, what are you talking about? You know, we're at this Red October moment, and even what you and I were talking about privately, it's like the Red Sea moment for the children of Israel. This is the whole month of October, everything red China, red in the economy, red in these military terms, inflation,
and red in the balance books.
Red in the balance books. So we've got, a government shutdown was looming. They've extended it. Only maybe till December. One thing that's not even fully understood is, the reporting for this third quarter is due October 15th for the corporations, government agencies with the inflation, etc. Things go wonky, and that could get narrowed down very dramatically. It's like saying, we're good to go for a couple of months after we start the exodus of Afghanistan, and 3 days later, China's in there dismantling our plot of spy aircraft, and our people are on the run to get out of the country alive. Their timing might not be what they claim it is. So that's you and me.
So am I crazy? Of course, everyone says, yeah, you are, but. Am I crazy to think I'm not getting the real truth about, are we in a war with China? Are we in a war?
I think that's a valid question. If let's go back to the vote. The places where this was orchestrated from and the people involved, ultimately, the contention is that it was orchestrated out of China, and even the Dominion machines were manufactured in China. So if you attack digitally with a fraudulent stolen vote to capture control of a country, that is considered an act of war. So if China was involved in digitally twisting and flipping the vote, that's an act of war. Then we're at war with China. And because the leadership is then not valid, they're Manchurians. They are under the control of a foreign entity taking the helm over America. And by extension, the world. If America is this premier power in the world, you control America and you control the fate of the world. And that's, and even China. Ultimately, do you say China is its own person, or is China itself in the grip of and under the control of some supranational body or group like a James Bond movie? And that would, in fact, be my contention. It's far more involved, extensive, complicated than most people care to even begin to acknowledge.
Well, are they crazy or conspiracy loons when they say that China is run by one bloodline family?
Well, really, it's multiple bloodlines there. There's always going to be one that's more powerful than the others. It's like the royal bloodlines around the world. You've got 13 royal bloodlines that trace their lineage back to Cain. And they boast about privately amongst themselves that they're Cainites, children of Cain. And so the right to rule as Cains or kings of the earth by blood. And that extends into China, extends into other places most people don't realize, Japan. All of
How
those
come we never
groups,
heard that? How come as kids we never heard that there were all these Cainites in the world? We never even heard about them.
well, I mean, it's hidden in plain sight. It's the royal bloodlines. And it's not that they're hiding so much as it's hiding in plain sight. You don't understand the magic. You know, have you ever played the
I
game
get it now.
Spoons? If you play the game Spoons, you know, I remember at kids' camps, you know, you'd play the spoons and they'd hand 2 spoons to you and they would be, you know, crossed, uncrossed, you know, upside down, right side up, all sorts of things. And you'd hand them to the next person. The next person would have to decide, is that crossed or uncrossed? Well, you're looking at the spoons. If they're crossed, you say, well, they're crossed. They'd say wrong. And you'd be like, well, what did I do wrong? You'd have to hand them the next person. You'd try to set them some way and they'd look at them, they'd say wrong. And while you're looking at the spoons, the whole sneak of the game, especially for the people that know it, behind the scenes is, are your legs crossed or uncrossed? And so you're looking at the spoons, has nothing to do with the spoons. It's the legs.
Oh.
And so crossed or uncrossed. And even you could be in on the game, you know, in the game, have your legs crossed. You don't know that that's what they're looking at. And everybody else that knows what's going on is like, you know, looking at you, saying uncrossed, well, your legs are crossed and you don't even know what you're doing. It's this captured operation thing.
That's a trick, pulling a trick on tricking people.
Yeah, it's a trick. And then once you know the trick, crossed or uncrossed, it's all about the legs, not the spoons. The spoons are just a distraction. And so that's this royal thing. You're looking at all the high profiles and everything else, has nothing to do it. Who's the purest blood back to Cain? That's the whole royal trick. And that's why I talk about it in the book and in Kid by the Side of the Road. You know, that's some of the stuff with the royal lineage and like that. So, you know, but not to get too distracted with that right this minute.
But why do they think it's so cool to be descendants of Cain? They think it's cool to be a murderer?
Well, they view Cain differently than everybody else. They believe
obviously they still believe in the Bible, right? Where they're getting the reference of Cain.
Well, you know, it's a historical document, you know, to these occultists, these people with their religion hidden in plain sight. They believe that Cain was the child of Lucifer and that the sin in the garden was that Lucifer had sex with Eve, that Eve wasn't raped, that Eve was beguiled and had sex with Satan, Lucifer, the devil, and that she then went and taught Adam the trick. And so she became pregnant by two different fathers during the same birth cycle. And she had twins, children born in the same birth cycle, but of two different fathers, Cain and Abel. That's why Cain is not listed as a child of Adam. Cain is excluded from the Adamic family because he wasn't fathered by Adam. The mother was Eve in both children's case, but not the father. And so they believe that Cain, being a child of Lucifer, Satan, the devil, Samael, he goes by 1,000 names. That being a child of Lucifer, that they aren't just mere human, they're more than human. They don't look at themselves as being less than human. They look at themselves as being more than human. You want to say space aliens or something like that. You know, a lot of people are looking for the aliens, the reptilians that have landed on Earth. The reptilians is just code, just like spoons. It's just code for children of Lucifer from the Cain side of the family, that they're royals. They're the royal bloodlines. And so they count Lucifer as their father. And that's why there's these Baal worshipers, these Moloch worshipers, and they believe that they're children of the fallen angel at Mount Hermon.
So that allows them to do the things they do.
Well, because they believe that they're more than human, that we're here to be farmed, that we're there, you know, they are farming us, and they look at us like food, literally.
Yeah.
So it's a very
so they do glorify being a murderer then.
Well, they don't look at it as murder in the same sense as we do. They look at it as though they are farming us and we're food to them, and as the devil himself does, a means to an end. And once you kind of understand their mentality, it's a lot easier to understand their actions. Belief, I've said this in articles that I've done over the last several decades at different times, and you'll find it in some of the articles I do under other people's names. Belief is the driver of action. What you believe determines what you do and how you do it. So
that's
belief,
the locos. That's the locomotive of the whole train is the belief.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way of saying it. But here we are. Let me just dive into this. I don't want to lose too many people on this. Let me just dive into this. You know, we talked about this Red Sea moment. Red October. Everything going red at the same time. I was talking with Jim Caviezel the other day, and he said, well, is that like when the gauges on your car start going red? The oil temperature gauge goes up, the water temperature gauge goes up, the transmission temperature gauge goes up. You know, something broke, something's not working right, and it's overheating, and you don't got long before something's going to blow. And so all the gauges are going red. That's Red October. Everything that can start going off the rails and go wrong is this Red October moment. You know, the economy, Red China. You know, the Australian defense minister said that war with China at this point cannot be ruled out, and that was just a couple weeks ago. It's becoming more dire by the minute, and you know, I think we'll see some Band-Aids here and there, but it's not actually going to wind down. It's going to get far worse. And, you know, Israel, with your background, your history, and that's why I wanted to talk with you about it. You know, the whole history of Israel, as they left Egypt, you know, you had these 5 plagues, 10 plagues that happened to get the people freed out of bondage in Egypt, and they were oppressed.
It was to make it so bad that the people would want to leave it.
Because they didn't want to. They were comfortable in their slavery, as hard as it was, and they didn't. It was what they knew.
Mm-hmm.
So to go do something different, they didn't want to leave, and so the Egyptians didn't want to let them go, and they frankly didn't want to leave their slavery.
No, they didn't.
So
They were comfortable, but it was what they knew.
they had to be almost driven from slavery, and then when they did get free, they get out to the Red Sea, and of all the miracles that were done to that point for the nation of Israel, the great one at that point was the Red Sea, when they were there at the Red Sea and the sea was parted and they passed through on the dry ground. But everything that led up to that, till that moment, you think of these great, incredible miracles, and the greatest of them up to that point in time, was the Red Sea. And of course, that's this moment that America's in. We talked actually now almost 2 years ago. We did an interview talking about this election and the
Right.
period of the election being like the Book of Esther. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And
Yes, I do.
in that Esther discourse that we did, we talk about the flip. There's two parts to the flip in Esther. There's the part where Esther has this big party feast, and it's 2 nights in a row because one wasn't enough, where she brings in King Xerxes, and then at the very end of the second night, she explains to him that she's under a penalty of death, that there's this mandate that's gone out that on a certain day out in the future, that all Jews have to be killed, and she's a Jew, and so is Mordecai. And here the king had been partying with Mordecai and Esther 2 days in a row over at Harem Girl House, and the other person that was present was Haman. And so they're all drinking and partying, they're best buddies. Haman's yucking it up, slapping Mordecai on the back, and just being the greatest guy. And then come to find out that Haman has it in for Mordecai, has had a hangman's machine built out in the backyard, which was different than we hang people today. It wasn't a gallows in the sense we have today. It was a spear, a very long spear, and it was set in the rectum, and then the person was hoisted up in the air very high. They could see over the walls of the city and all around, and that was planned for Mordecai. And when the king found out what had happened, and then found out about this device, and we talked about it in our show, and he came back in, he's all drunk, hearing all this. He's trying to sober himself up. He comes in off the patio, and he sees Haman hanging on Esther's garments, pleading with her for her to not tell the king anymore, or it cost his life. You know what a hothead he is, and how he can go off on a moment's notice. The king sees him hanging off her robes, is totally lit up instantaneously, exactly what Haman was concerned about. He's a bit of a hothead and he's a drunk. And he orders the guards to take him and go hang him on the hangman's device outside that he had built for Mordecai. And he ends up being hung on this device of his own making. It's like in Proverbs, it says, "He who digs a pit for his neighbor will himself fall into it." And so,
boy, isn't that the truth?
The Haman died by a device of his own making that he had intended for the other guy. And that's actually the part of the story that most people don't understand from the Red Sea moment. Most people have never considered what the Red Sea was really all about. And that's what I wanted to kind of share with your folks today. See, we have this Red October, and most of the people listening to us, Roseanne, are of the opinion that all this red, all this danger, Will Robinson, this is the end. It's all over. We've been painted into a corner, is intended for us. That's not what the story really ends up telling us. See, when Moses brought the people out there to the Red Sea, it wasn't fully just Moses that brought them there. They had this incredible miracle that happened after the last plague on Egypt. You remember what the last plague was? The firstborn of all of Egypt died when the angel of death passed over the city. And the Israelites were spared because they were told to put the blood of a lamb on the lintel and the doorposts, which is the top and the sides of the door to every house in the land of their tribes of Israel. And so the death angel, when it saw the blood of the lamb on the doorpost and the lintel, passed over that home and went on to the next one, to the next one. And so all those that didn't have the blood of the lamb, which is symbolic of Christ and the sacrifice to come, the death angel would take the firstborn of the household. And so all across Egypt, there was mourning and wailing from the youngest to the oldest. Grandparents, children, teenagers, whoever the firstborn was gone. And, you know, God says, vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord. There's justice and there's vengeance. God doesn't call on us to do vengeance. He does vengeance. And the vengeance there was in part due to the fact that the very beginning of Moses's whole journey in this world was that Pharaoh, at the time that Moses was to be born, had decreed that these children, that the Jews, at that time they were called the Israelites, they were the slaves, they were the sons and daughters, children of Israel. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were these forefathers, and Jacob, in this journey that he was taking around the land, in this pilgrimage, he turned to God and had a salvation moment, if you will. And God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And then the nation of Israel are called Israelites with this new name that God gave to Jacob as a child of promise. And so the Israelites, the children of Jacob, had become extremely numerous in the land of Egypt. Well, the early history also has to include in Egypt, how did they get there? They had this brother. Jacob had 12 sons. And the youngest son, Joseph, he had a dream when he was little. And in this dream, he saw himself ruling over the rest of the brothers. And the brothers got jealous. They got mad. In fact, I refer to it in the movie The Called. Who is this dreamer? Let us cast him in a pit, and we'll throw some blood on his cloak and pretend that he was killed by wild animals, and take it back to our father and be done with this dreamer who thinks he's going to rule over us. And then they sold Joseph to a caravan. They didn't want the blood of Joseph, their brother, on their hands. So instead of killing him, they sell him for money. Kind of like Judas and his 30 pieces of silver. They sell their brother for money to a caravan that's traveling by, that's headed for Egypt. And Joseph becomes a slave in Egypt by his own brother's hand. And they take his coat of many colors, which was indicative of ruling. And by the way, each of the tribes of Israel, as you know, has a different jewel that denotes them, and they're on the priest's garments, etc.
Right.
Well, that coat of many colors has the colors of each of the tribes, each of the sons of Jacob.
Right.
He was
a big multi-tribal priest.
And so he had that coat of many colors. They splatter this blood from a beast on it, say that it's Joseph's, and take it back to Jacob, their dad, Israel. And he's in horrible pain and mourning because his favored son, the youngest, has been killed by animals. And so it disturbs him the rest of his life, obviously. And he's already a pretty old guy at that point in time. All this time, while he thinks that Joseph is dead, the brothers are done with him and he's gone. Joseph finds himself in Egypt as a slave. And there he has a couple of dreams as a result of the ability to have dreams. And there's all sorts of dramas you can go read. He got accused of trying to rape, Potiphar's wife, and she was setting him up and got mad because it was he, as a slave, didn't want to go against his master. And so she set him up and had him sent to prison. A lot of bizarre stuff. And so then here Joseph finds himself in prison, and Pharaoh has a dream, and one of the prisoners remembers that Joseph can read dreams, interpret them. They call Joseph up, he interprets the dream, and it's the dream where there's 7 fat cows and 7 skinny ones, and 7 fat ears of corn and 7 skinny ones. And all the priests of Pharaoh can't figure out the dream, and he's got them under a threat of death if they don't figure it out. And they don't just have to tell him what the interpretation of the dream is. Pharaoh tells him, well, you got to tell me what the dream was first and then give me the interpretation, or I won't believe your interpretation because you'll just make something up. So the trick is that if you tell me that it's the dream I had and you're wrong, I'm going to have you killed that way. So now all the priests are under this threat of death if they don't come up with somebody that can figure out what Pharaoh's dream was and then what the interpretation of it is. And so they're afraid to give a wrong answer. And Pharaoh, they find the slave kid down in the bottom of the prison, and he's brought up because people said, no, he can interpret it. And he comes up, tells Pharaoh both what his dream was and what the interpretation was. And the interpretation was there was 7 fat years coming and then 7 lean years. And that was why there was fat cows and heavy corn, and thin cows and weak corn or diseased corn. And so Pharaoh, because he knows this person has insights that are divine in origin from God himself, to have been able to both give the dream and the interpretation and have it be correct, Pharaoh makes Joseph the number 2 most powerful person in the kingdom, under him only. And so Joseph becomes, literally the second most powerful person in the world in that era, because Egypt is this unbelievable Mecca at the time. So Joseph then, presides over storing up the grain, setting aside everything. Then when the famine hits, Jacob's family is starving to death. They take some of their wealth, and Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt. They show up, and Joseph recognizes them, of course, is probably looking for them because God's given him insight that this is going to happen. And there's all sorts of events happen. Ultimately, Jacob and all of the family moved to Egypt under Joseph's protection. And exactly as Joseph had the dream, his brothers, now he rules over them in Egypt. And from that point, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob show up. And the best guess is there was about 66 of them, is what people want to use for their account. I think there was 77, but depends on who's writing the book. And they show up there in Egypt. And then from that small number, the 12 sons of Jacob become the nation of Israel, nation of Jacob, whose name was turned to Israel. And then they begin to proliferate in Egypt. And over a 400-year period, they become a very large number, estimated 400 years later to be around 2.4 million people, about 600,000 men, about 600,000 women, and 2 kids each. Kind of a mentality is where it's at. Different ages, etc. But that's just this rough estimate. So in that short period, they become the nation of Israel. But because of their number, it was so great that the Pharaoh and his advisors are looking at this huge crowd of people, and they've become enslaved in Egypt under the crown, if you will, under Pharaoh's control. And they were becoming so numerous that Pharaoh's advisors are going, if they decide they don't want to be slaves anymore, there's so many of them, they could take us out. We need to thin the herd a bit. There's so many of them. Sound familiar, anybody? There is so many of them. We need to cut their numbers radically. And so they go out and decide to do a baby killing. Too many Israelites. We want to kill all the babies. So in this moment, when these advisors advise Pharaoh to have all the babies killed, and by the way, no relation to Haman, but Pharaoh's chief advisor at the time is reputed to be named Haman, same as in Esther's day. And so they advise Pharaoh to have all the babies killed, I think 2 years of age and younger. And in this period, it was a mass killing. And in this period, Moses's mom, she's pregnant. She tends the women at Pharaoh's court. And so she's a slave girl in Pharaoh's court. Pretty hard to hide that you're pregnant, but she may have hidden it reasonably enough. But knowing that her baby's going to be killed if they think she's had the baby, she places the baby, Moses, in a basket made of reeds. And then she sets him adrift in this slow moving part of the sea, in the Nile. And he's floating down the sea through the reeds at a very slow pace. She probably set him adrift in the night when nobody could see this. And she's living upriver from where Pharaoh's harem girl house is located.
This is another one of those. This is another one of those times when we have totally different teachings and understandings about this. But I'm totally cool with you telling.
Yeah, well, so I want to hear your side. So she goes down to work, and here comes the basket down the river, nudges Pharaoh's daughter over there. She sees the Egyptian child, or sees the basket, goes out and grabs it, and discovers the child in it, knows it's one of the children of the Egyptian women that are under threat of death. And then Moses is saved through the water. This is symbolic of baptism, of a watery death. Baptism is symbolic of being born through death or drowning, etc. And then in this basket of reeds, and he's raised by Pharaoh's daughter in Pharaoh's court to be a pharaoh, raised side by side with the man who at that time was also a child, who does become pharaoh. And so the pharaoh that's chasing him down, going to the Red Sea, was raised as a brother to Moses in Pharaoh's house, in Pharaoh's courts, and knows all the tricks, knows the strategy, as a military strategist, an economic strategist. And this family of Jacob, known as Israel, and Joseph, who had preserved Egypt through the famine and made it wealthier than ever, and then the people that had become slaves. So that's kind of a synopsis of how we got to this moment where the people are slaves in Israel. But I want to hear your angle on that too.
Well, mine's from the Torah.
Yes.
And it was Moses' sister, Miriam, who was the protagonist of the whole story. So that I'll tell another time, but it's very deep and a little different from yours. It was she who was Pharaoh's daughter's handmaiden and also her advisor, and also like very deep, like best friends with, because at that time, I guess like now, I know I get really close with my assistants. And they were very close, and she is the one who brought Moses to Pharaoh's daughter, and said, I found this baby. She knew, it was her brother. And she said, I found this baby. And whatever words, there's a whole bunch of words exchanged, and they agree to raise the baby in the family. And that's who was Moses' teacher, was his sister. And
Yes,
so,
and of course she was
he
very
doesn't find
close
that
with
out
Moses,
till way
obviously.
later. He doesn't find that out till way later. But also, we learned that the true hidden hero of the whole story is Yitro, and Torah has a lot to say about Yitro and what he taught Moses after Moses retreated from Egypt to get his head straight of what he felt his real contribution to history was going to be. And he
of course,
retreated to the common people to soak in some common sense.
Right. And Jethro, I agree with you, tremendous. People don't really fully grasp the genius of Jethro in Moses' education. Moses, you think about it, he was educated in Pharaoh's court. So he knew all of the magician's tricks.
Right.
For example, when he came to Egypt with this mission from God to free God's people from slavery and take them to the land that had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob during Abraham's sojourning. When he came to Egypt, and Pharaoh's challenging him, well, who sent you? And he says, I am sent me, because God told me if he asks who sent you, tell him that I am. I am that I am. And by the way, the devil wants to be as God. So the devil doesn't want to be greater than God, because there is no one greater than God. So the devil only aspires to be as great as God. So God says, I am. The devil says, I will that I am.
Yeah.
As an act of will I am. And so, that's this challenge to God's supremacy that comes in there. But Moses, what's interesting about Moses, here he is raised in Pharaoh's court with all of the skills to be a Pharaoh, and the same advisors, the same teachers. But he also has this other additional teacher, which is Miriam, and I agree with you on that, and explaining these things to him. And by the way, Moses's mother was brought in as a wet nurse, so he even got nursed by his own real mother. And so in that whole thing, when Moses realizing that he's actually one of the children of Jacob, that he's an Israelite, and they weren't really called Jews at the time, they were Israelites. When he realizes that, and then he sees some of the treatment of the Jews, the Israelites, by these Egyptian taskmasters, one of them so upset him and offended him that he killed him. And that became the basis for having to send Moses into exile. He didn't just go on a mild journey. He was forced into exile, not put to death, but spared, because he was raised as a Pharaoh, but sent into exile. And when he went into exile, first he was saved passing through the water in this boat of reeds, kind of like Noah being saved in a boat through the water at the great flood. There's some symbology there, and all of humanity at the same time. The nation of Israel, this leader that was going to bring them out of slavery, he was saved through the water. But then again, when he leaves Egypt to go into exile, a lot of the commentators talk about the fact that his path to North Africa, where he met his wife and his, the father-in-law Jethro, took him through the Red Sea, at the upper end of the sea. It's got reeds and marshes, and so he passed through the sea there into the desert and on to where he came to the other side where he was thirsty and was at the well, and the woman drew water for him, who then became his wife. By the way, Jethro and his children were black.
Right.
So Moses had a black wife.
Right.
In fact, Miriam famously, when at one point she was mocking Moses's wife and her advice and everything, and mocking the color of her skin, God was not happy with that. And so he says, "Oh, you like white? You think white's so cool? Okay, well, I'll give you white." And so she was covered with leprosy, which makes your skin very white, like a snowflake. And it took Moses interceding to have her, that curse removed from her, because she had spoken against Moses's wife. So, and of course, that's the basis for the extraction of the tribes out of North Africa back to Israel, which are these black people who themselves are seen as children of Israel. Right. And that's this whole segment of the Israeli population. A lot of people don't understand.
Yeah,
so
a large part of the population.
Well, but so my point here, though, I think the one thing where I wanted to kind of get your thoughts a bit.
Mm-hmm.
See, you have to think about what Egypt was like. It's the greatest metropolis on the planet. It's got the pyramid. The pyramid at that time was completely covered with white marble. And it was of a type of limestone, really. It looked like marble in a sense, but polished, and had this gold cap on the top, purportedly. And the pyramid we see today, all of that covering has been removed. It was scavenged. But at that time, that material, that limestone, it would gather sunlight during the day. And at night, it would glow like a nightlight. And it was, you could see it, at great distances. It was this incredible, feat of building. The mechanics of the Great Pyramid are just astonishing. I mean, people are still learning things now all the time about it. For example, the face of the pyramid, the four sides, the face is actually concave, like a big satellite dish, where it's got a slight curve to it, but the curve is very, very subtle. Each face has exactly the curve that is the curvature of the earth. If you were to take it and turn it on its side, it's got exactly the same tiny, minute curve to it that the surface of the earth does, slightly concave. Yep, it's very, very subtle. It's amazing. Wow. If you measure the pyramid in what we call Jewish inches, as opposed to English inches, which is their very slight difference. It's how they, whether the inches are held in platinum or gold or silver, etc., and those materials can expand or contract. Yeah,
that's hilarious. I love that.
Well, if you measure the pyramid in Jewish inches, the circumference in inches is an extrapolation of the actual circumference of the earth at 24,000 some odd miles. So it's a precise fraction. There's all sorts of amazing math involved in the Great Pyramid that show this authorship that's way beyond even current understanding today. Is challenged by all this minutia of the precision of the Great Pyramid. But Egypt is this incredible place of technology, very advanced, very hierarchical in the society, the bloodlines. Pharaoh is, when we say president in the American system, the president's the word that we use in English to mean pharaoh. That's one of the interpretations of the term president is pharaoh.
Right.
And when you look at all the Washington, D.C., and the symbology around Washington, D.C. The whole city is one great religious city. It's an occult city, but it's religious. It's as religious as the Vatican.
And it's all for Pharaoh.
And it's all for Pharaoh. It's built around this pharaohic premise, Egyptian symbology, etc., all through the area. And so the president of Egypt, Pharaoh of Egypt, this ruler, he's at the top of the heap. And at one time, Joseph was revered as the savior of Egypt, the person that saved them from this incredible famine and kept them going. And Pharaoh, later generations forgot Joseph's role in saving Egypt. And so here, 400 years later, the children of Israel are considered a nuisance because they're growing so fast that they could overrun Egypt. But the interesting thing there, too, is that why didn't God just let the children of Israel take over Egypt? Why? And if they're that numerous and they're that close, why send them all the way over to Canaan land? Why not just let them take over Egypt? It's theirs anyway. Joseph saved them. Have a little war right there. You're there already, and take over Egypt. In fact, there's a lot of people there within the Jewish Israeli family that were probably contending for that. They didn't want to leave Egypt as slaves. They wanted to work a plan to take control of Egypt, but that wasn't God's plan. That was somebody else's plan. If you think about it, Roseanne, when Joseph got to Egypt, he was one of the things when he brought his family down, Jacob's sons down to Egypt, he had their family history, which was verbal, written down. And the book that is from that, I've talked about it in your show before, is the lost books of Adam and Eve. And so the first 50 days after Adam and Eve left the garden is this lost books of Adam and Eve that Joseph had written down. That's the memory that Egypt had recorded about Adam and Eve and how they came out of the garden. And then the other thing that Joseph did that's not seen now anywhere, but it's purported that he also recorded the wanderings of Abraham, and that was passed on, including verbally. We see it in the books of Moses, Pentateuch, and that is where the wanderings of Abraham, who was called by God to leave Chaldea, where they were heavily into, occult readings and future predictions and stuff like that. Abraham was sent into this far off land, which was becoming Canaan land. And everywhere that Abraham set the sole of his foot was to be given to his children. And this is when Abraham was childless. And so he had this belief, this dream, that he was going to be the father of nations, even though he hadn't even had one kid. And he traveled through this whole land that became the nation of Israel, where the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, when Abraham did finally have his child of promise, which was Isaac, when he and Sarah were extremely old, beyond the age of having children, she became pregnant, has this child, Isaac, and Isaac then has the child Jacob, and that became the father of nations, just as was promised to Abraham, his grandfather. And so when Joseph had the whole family there in Egypt, he recorded this family history. And he says, okay, someday we're going back where our great grandfather wandered the land of Canaan. And we're going to possess that land. It's our gift from God. And when you go, when this happens, when this people become a nation, because Joseph actually, he saw dreams. He had dreams of the future, kind of like Daniel did later. He would see
Yeah.
things. Joseph saw what would happen out in the future.
Yeah, he had
and
sight.
He told
He was a seer.
he was a seer. In fact, if you remember when the cup was supposedly stolen, and they sent and had Benjamin kept as the child,
Right.
that forced him to come back when they came for grain. Joseph set him up to make their father come back to Egypt. It was Joseph's cup that was a fortune-telling cup.
Right.
That was supposedly stolen from Joseph and was actually hidden in the backpack of Benjamin. And so then that was because he was a seer. He could see things. That's why he was, called up into Pharaoh's court. He could read the dreams. Joseph saw the future, remembered the family history about Abraham, saw the future, saw a day when the people would leave Egypt and go to where God had always intended them to go, not to take over Egypt and own Egypt, going from slave to master, but going to a land that God had already promised to him. And he tells them, and when you go, you got to take my bones. So all these pharaohs wanted their bones buried in, preserved and mummified and everything else. But Joseph wasn't, while he was in Egypt, he didn't actually become an Egyptian. He still counted his tribe, his history, as a child of Abraham. Even though he'd gone into slavery, he intended and saw the future and wanted even his bones to be taken from this land of the occult, land of slavery, to go to the land where the children would be free and grow and do what God had intended for them. And so when the Israelites
simple
left,
like that? It's simple like that. It's like the occult is slavery, period. And, freedom is, a belief in our connection to God only. It isn't a connection to a feudal system on earth.
well, if you're in slavery, are you beholden to God in heaven, or are you under the thumb of some man, some created being? If you're in the control of Satan himself, are you in the control of God, or are you in the control of some other entity at the whim and the will? Are you steered away from God's intended direction for your life?
Yeah,
And,
you're under the command and control of some BS political system on earth that has money in it.
well, where is your life energy going? Here in America right now, if you work your 9 to 5 job, 6 or 7 days a week anymore, and your wife and kids all do the same, their labors are converted to dollars. And
which is debt.
then you can take your dollars and go out and buy things you need to live, but after a piece is taken out in the taxes. And by the way, go look at any dollar bill, any $5, $10, $20, $50, $100 bill, every last one of them. What's all through that currency? It's the images, the imprints, the brands of the occult, including
no kidding.
Egypt, the pyramids, the eagles, all the different branding. And it's occult branding, the owls, frogs, everything. All of that branding, why is that on your money? What's that got to do with being an American? It's because
it's part of the brainwashing.
Well, it's the branding that you're a slave.
Right.
Your energies are turned into their purposes. Your energies are converted into um, something as an intermediary, and then a portion of it's given back to you.
When they say the almighty dollar, they ain't lying.
That's true. And it's not the God Almighty dollar. It's a God, but it's not the God. And that's one of the things going red here right now is in the currency markets, by the way, that most people don't see. It's a promise. The paper bill is a promise of return. It's not a guarantee. It has no actual substance other than the promise. Most of the dollars that most people have aren't even paper. They're dots and tittles in a computer program somewhere.
Right.
And what happens in that kind of currency is eventually it goes down to the value of whatever it's printed on. Well, if it's paper, it might be 4 or 5 cents per bill. But if it's now dots and tittles on a computer screen, it could go down to the value of dots and tittles on a computer screen where it's not even worth the paper it's printed on. Okay. So you're a slave.
It's like the lies of today aren't even worth the paper they're printed on. The lies in the news, they're not even worth the paper. Well, how about, let me ask you some, well, I don't want to interrupt. I want you to finish.
No. We're having fun. We're having fun. Anybody that's listening to us, Roseanne, has to be laid back. Look, if you're in a rush to get an answer, this probably isn't the right people to be listening to. We're having a fun conversation. There's a lot of little dodges and dives here and kind of fun, but you're thinking through, how does this apply to us today? And some things aren't clear. You have to kind of go a circuitous route. By the way, Roseanne, the straightest route from Egypt, when the Israelites left Egypt, they knew where they were going. Think about this. Joseph had the dream. He recorded the history. He recorded the family history. And the family history said, you are promised by God through your father Abraham that all the land that Abraham sojourned in, camped in, traveled in, wherever he set the sole of his foot, that was to be given to his offspring at some future time. And so by faith, God promised Abraham, and he was given what God promised, a nation of children. And so those children, the nation of Israel, what Joseph saw was those children had to go take and possess that land. And he knew where the land was. He'd recorded the travels of Abraham. And those travels were through this area where the Canaanites had camped out and built their cities. And by the way, think of it this way. The devil knows what God's saying. He knew what the family history was for the Jews, for the Israelites. He knew what God had promised Abraham. Where did these Canaanites come from? Cainites, the children of Cain. Where did they come from? All the way back to Cain, this back to the garden, this brothers, half-brothers, fighting for control of the planet. So the Canaanites, under the unction of the devil himself, Moloch and Baal, who require the sacrifice of children to serve them, to feed them.
Well, right there, that is the definition of slavery. And all of slavery runs with that prerequisite, the sacrifice of children.
Yes. And so the children, the Cainites, go out and they occupy the land that was promised to Abraham and his seed, the Israelites. They occupy that. What is that from a satanic perspective, thinking chess 5D?
That's imperialism.
Well, the devil is blocking God. It's a blocking move in chess. He puts his soldiers out there, his players, his pieces out there to block the children of Israel from being able to ever get in the land. It's a blocking move. And he includes, giants, big, big stuff. So when Joseph saw the future, and saw where the people were supposed to go. He says, I want you to take my bones with you. But then God, at the end of the plagues and the people leave Egypt, do they head straight for the place that Joseph had said going? They go straight to the place God showed Moses he was supposed to take people straight to Canaan land for the fight? No, what he does, there's a miracle that occurs as the people are assembling, and the Egyptians actually have to pay off the Israelites to leave Egypt. Get away from us, leave us, take your plagues with you. And so they take all of their treasure, all of their weapons. Think about this. They took valuable weapons, swords and knives and shields, and they gave this weaponry. The children of Israel didn't just leave with gold from those that they had served.
Right. They had all the wealth of Egypt.
All the wealth of Egypt. And think about this, Roseanne. You and I talked about this previously, and I think you're the one that actually specifically said it to me. That was payback, recompense for all the years of slavery. The gold and precious things of Egypt that were bestowed on the children of Israel was what they had earned in the 400 years of slavery.
Right.
They weren't stealing anything. It was reparations. And there'd been a war condition because they'd killed the children of Israel. That was how Moses was born, in the midst of a massacre.
That's right.
And was saved through a blood massacre of children.
That's right.
Through that watery grave and basket, and raised in Pharaoh's court. But when God had all the people assembled to leave Egypt, what appeared at that time? A miracle happened that was astonishing. There was a huge cloud, like a pillar, by day that went up into the heavens. And everybody, you couldn't miss it. It was like a tornado. And by night, it was a pillar of fire and a tornado of fire. And it went ahead of the people. And it was like a guiding light or something. Go this way. And it was, you also had vipers, snakes in that area. And so this pillar by night, it'd keep the snakes away, keep the vermin away. So this pillar of smoke or cloud by day to protect them from the heat, and this pillar of fire by night, providing the warmth and also the light. And it led the way for the people. But when it went, it didn't go straight towards Canaan land. In fact, what happened, the path between Egypt and Canaan land took you past huge fortifications that the Egyptians built. These rock fortifications were for defense, and they were at choke points where if an invading army was to come to try and do harm or take Egypt, these were defensible positions, and they were heavily manned. If the Israelites had gone past those locations, the contention is that they could have been, Pharaoh changed his mind, they could have been attacked, they'd be vulnerable. And plus they'd have had to fight with the Philistines to get across their land on their way to Canaan land. And they weren't ready to fight. Even though they had the arms, they didn't have the skill sets. So God, not Moses, God took them a direction with the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night out along the desert road, or deserted road, if you want to put it that way, but this barren desert road, and over beside the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, and along the edge of the Reed Sea, and around all those fortifications, around the Philistines, to head towards the land that God had promised Abraham and intended. It was a long, long way around. And while they were traveling along, getting there, what happens? I was just talking with Jim Caviezel this morning. We were talking about, he took this walk, kind of impromptu, with Father Mahana, a friend of both of ours. He's the guy that actually did the exorcism of the White House for President Trump and Melania. And they took this sojourning that's called Camino, the Camino. It's where the word El Camino comes. Go trucking with your El Camino, your Chevy truck. The Camino is the walk. It's the journey. And so Jim took this long walk in Spain, 526 miles. I guess when you walk that far, you know exactly how many miles you went.
Yeah.
I was saying, about 500 miles. He says, no, 520. I says, 520, you know that exactly? Well, actually, it's 526. You know,
I guess you would.
You'd remember it. Well, God took the nation of Israel the long way around, but that whole time he's getting them in the right mental state. He's training them how to follow his lead, and they're
a lot
going
of them
around
had to
these
die
obstacles.
Off too.
Well, but
He
in
wanted
that
a lot
early
of them
stage,
to die off.
well, in that early stage there, they were all strong. Remember, the children of Israel had been in slavery. Think back to Moses. At the time that Moses was born, besides killing all of the young children, Pharaoh, by his advisors, Haman and others, his advisors said, stop giving them hay. What the Israelites were doing was making bricks. And so they were provided with straw, and then with the straw, they would make these bricks with straw and clay. They'd fire them up in a kiln, and that was used for building. So they were really the basis for the building there in Egypt, all their big construction projects. So when Pharaoh did this decree to have the kids killed, he also said, and now force them to also go out and gather their own straw and rubble for the bricks themselves. Don't just provide it to them. And in that time period, with these extra labors placed on them, which made their days of labor longer, they became stronger. When the children of Israel left Egypt, they weren't weak. They were strong because of all of their labors under these harsh taskmasters. They left Egypt with all these goods, all these possessions, all this armory. They didn't have the training to use it. They didn't have the mentality to use it. They had the basis for wealth. They had the basis for strength. They didn't have the mind or the training to be strong. And this journey on this long path out of Egypt was about getting them to come together and work together and think together and all that. That's what this journey, this walk is all about. Jim was talking about that you start out with all these possessions and your backpack on this Camino run. And by the time you get a few days in it, you've left all the stuff behind you don't really need because it's heavy. You start out with a backpack that was 40 pounds and ends up with a backpack that's 20.
Yeah.
And you stop, you start casting stuff plus all the weight you lose. He says you start out with a few pretty fluffy. By the time you're done, 526 miles, you're skinny as a rail and you can't take in too many calories. You can eat like a horse. But that was the route that God was taking the children of Israel on. And that's this moment when we talk Red October that we as a nation are in after all this trial and tribulations of the last year and a half and the dramas and this fight that we're in. And now here we are at this Red Sea moment as a nation, as a world, really, observing what's happening here. And you have a lot of Americans that are of a mindset that it's all over, we're done. What happened was the pillar of fire by night and cloud by day, not Moses, the cloud led the people around this way. And at a certain point, along the edge of the Red Sea, God told Moses to tell the people, stop and go back. And everybody was like, what? And at this time, it looked like they were lost. They didn't know where they were going. They changed directions. They don't look like they know where they're going. They were going this way, and all of a sudden now they're going to go this way, and they don't know which way they're going to go. Come on. What's going on here? At the same time, Pharaoh had seller's remorse, had buyer's remorse, whatever. He had allowed the people to leave with all the possessions of Egypt, all this wealth, all this armory, and had second thoughts. And so his advisors are telling him, because they'd had this big death kill off. They'd had all these plagues. Nile had turned to blood, a plague of frogs, all sorts of things. Then the firstborn all dead. But Pharaoh's now all of a sudden he was shocked and stunned and pissed off. But then he changes his mind. No, we're not going to do that. So after the Israelites had traveled all the way around by the edge of the Red Sea, Pharaoh takes the straight route past all of his armaments. He has 600 chariots, which are like light armor, like tanks, and their chariots and the guys running the chariots, which could have a couple people on them, not just one. And then the foot soldiers that are along with them, and they go racing off, headed for the Israelites. 600 and some foot soldiers, might be a few thousand, going up against 2.5 million. That doesn't sound like very good odds, except the 2.5 million, the majority are women and children. And the men aren't even trained for battle, even if they have the armament. And then they don't have chariots, which are the tanks of the day. It'd be the equivalent of trying to face someone with a machine gun. And you just have a sword. It's not just facing somebody with a gun, it's somebody with a heavy machine gun. You can mow down thousands and thousands and never get close enough in to get a perfect kill shot to take out the chariot and the driver. So what happens is Pharaoh is leading the charge because the people of Egypt are having this remorse over losing all their possessions to the slaves, They can't stand it. They're pissed off.
This is a really deep subject, and we haven't even broached it. We have to have this conversation some other time, because I have a thesis about this whole thing, but we won't discuss it this time.
Well, we'll hear. I want to hear your side too on this, but let me just add this one little thing.
Okay.
When Pharaoh gets close to the people, imagine the people. What was interesting was the cloud of pillar by day and night had moved ahead of the people to the edge of the Red Sea. Moses had told them to back up. To Pharaoh and to his people, it looked like they were lost, because if they just kept continuing the direction they're going, they get to the shallower part of the Red Sea where it is reeds and it can be walked across. But they hadn't made it that far. They turned back, and now they got mountains on one side, the sea on the other. They've backed themselves into a trap. Pharaoh sees that they've made what is militarily, strategically, a horrible maneuver. Stupid, asinine. They've backed themselves into a corner. And Moses, who'd been very confident in the way he talked up to that point in time, Moses gets to this moment here, and he, all of a sudden, it's in Exodus chapter 14, verse 15, and Moses is acting like he doesn't know what to do next. In the scriptures, what it says is, the people are crying out to Moses after he gets them backed into this corner, and they see the dust cloud of all of Pharaoh's chariots coming at him, and the sea behind him, and the mountains to the side. There's no escape. they're about to get mowed down, because the way these chariots worked, the chariots would come in kind of a circuitous way, like little turnings. And so they didn't just come right straight into the crowd plowing into it. They would chomp off a piece of the people in these rotating groups. That's why, like in Charlton Heston and in the chariot scene, they're going in this big arena in circles. It was like a chainsaw. They could slice out a group of the people, and then they'd come back out and others would come in. Then they'd slice out another group like a chainsaw, and they'd cut into them. And the people would have to go back, and they'd just be mowed down and be going over the dead bodies. And so it was, for people that didn't have chariots, it was almost impossible to defeat these chariot fighters with their strategies. And so they can see death headed their way, and that they're going to be mowed down in this process, and there's no escape. And the people of as slaves, they knew the conquerings of the Egyptian army. They knew what they were capable of. They were very afraid of this, and so they're crying out to Moses. Moses, Moses, what were you thinking? Moses is he's not Pharaoh, he's not president. Moses is the sole commander. He's the commander in chief of this people. They can be an army. They are an army. They just don't realize it yet. And they're crying out to him, weren't there enough grave sites in Egypt? Did you have to bring us out here to have us killed? You were raised in Pharaoh's court as Pharaoh's brother. You did this to betray us. You brought us out here to have us all killed. They accuse Moses of being in collusion with Pharaoh and bringing them out to the edge of the sea to be mowed down. They don't even recall that the pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, was God that brought them to that point. And then they're screaming to Moses, and Moses, in kind of desperation, here's what the scripture says in 14:15 of Exodus, says, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Here they are backed up against the sea.
Right.
Moses cries out to God, what do I do now? What do I do now? He sticks his staff up, because his staff, turned into a snake. He's able to declare these things, dips it in the Nile, it turns to blood, etc. His staff was like this secret weapon. So you can see Moses out there waving his staff around, and he's trying to figure out what to do next. And to God, it was very clear he'd given Moses a mind. He had reason, he had intelligence, and he couldn't figure out. He knows that he's got the bones of Joseph with him. And the whole point is because they're going to the promised land that had been promised to Abraham and his seed. He has the children of Abraham with him. The promised land is the Canaan land. That's where they have to go. And so it should be obvious to Moses, hello, the promised land's on the other side of the Red Sea. Take him through the sea. That's the way it's kind of implied to him. God says to Moses, kind of annoyed, he says, why are you crying out to me? Don't you get it? Take him through the Red Sea. Go through it by faith. And so Moses, everybody up to that moment in time is expecting like a plague or something, all the, Egyptians to get hit by lightning, or to, suddenly fall dead, the oxygen's taken out of the air, something like that. Moses is waving his staff at the, Egyptians coming at him, and nothing's happening, right? Because he's not doing the right act. This time it's not vipers. This time it's not lightning. This time it's not the sea turning to blood. And he turns. He doesn't worry about the Egyptian. He turns to the sea that's blocking them, not from their escape, but from the intended direction God wanted them to go all along. They have to go to Canaan land, to the land of promise. That was where God had intended them to go for 500 years. 5, the number of grace. He turns to the Red Sea, this huge blockage, waves his staff in the air, and the sea parts before him. And then the whole nation of Israel, which is backed up. I mean, you can imagine all the people see this group coming at them, and they're getting in tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. You know, there's no escape here, there's no escape there. They just keep moving tighter and tighter. And then the sea opens up, and the water piles up like mountains on either side, gets higher and higher, but the people pass through on dry ground, and they walk right through this open sea because there was nowhere else to go. They were pushed through, you know, coerced through, whatever, but they get moving. And in the scriptural account, as they get to the other side, the Egyptians are still closing on them. The Egyptians got sucked in. They thought, even the Israelites thought, that the sea was their doom. It was their gloom. It was the very thing that was the path to their freedom. And so as the last Israelite gets through the Red Sea, as the Egyptians are closing in on them, the interesting thing is that this light armor, these chariots, they're heavier and their wheels are thin. And as they're going through this seabed floor, while it's dry right on the top, that weight goes down in and the mud starts to cake up, and then the chariots don't want to go straight and they go askew. And at the last bit, the chariots are like turning. The horses can't pull them through because they're bogging down in the seabed. And they're slowing down as they get closer while we're waiting for the last of the women and children to get through on the other side. And as the last one steps above the waterline, God removes the block, removes the walls that held those angels' hands that held the sea back. And the sea, which had piled up like mountains in height, suddenly collapsed down on the Egyptians, drowning them all. And in the record, in some of the recordings, it said that Pharaoh himself, in those last moments, leading the chariots nearly to where they got to the Israelites, at the last moment realized he wasn't going to make it, saw the waters collapsing, and declared, "The God of Israel is the true God." And because he made that pronouncement, even at the edge of death, his bones were preserved. His body was found in that aftermath. And then his body was taken back to Egypt, mummified, and kept as a marker through history that he himself had found that God was in fact the true God, and declared that even in those last moments there in the collapse of the Red Sea. And from that point on, of course, the Israelite nation saved through water, just like Moses was, just like Noah was, just like is symbolic in the baptism in the New Testament. And the people go on to do all the rest of the things they do. There was complaining and mourning and, you know, bizarreness. The people were dying off because you can take the people out of Egypt,
Right.
but you can't take the Egypt out of people sometimes. And only those that could have that taken out of them were allowed to go into the promised land.
Right.
And that was this rest of the story that we'll tell some other time.
Yeah. I like the part of the story where they were wandering around for 40 years while they tried to figure out a system of jurisprudence and a system of law that was not wholly dependent on a system of slavery. After they just come out of slavery, what were they going to invent to replace it that would be a system of justice for the people? That's my favorite part of the whole five books of Moses, is how the way they tried to create something new. And of course they were unable to do it, but the whole story, it continues on that they, you know, the story still continues to this day, how do we do it?
Well,
How will we do it?
The one thing you mentioned, and I think it's very relevant to Jethro, Moses was having to preside over as judge all these disputes of the people. So somebody would have an argument with so-and-so, they didn't agree on something. They'd come to Moses, you have to decide this, you have to decide that. They were wearing him out. And Jethro, at one point, comes to Moses, and thank goodness for good fathers-in-law. If you get the chance to get one, you're really blessed. And so here's this Jethro, who's just a tribesman. He has sheep that he raised. When Moses went into exile in North Africa, he became a sheep herder of all things. And he's got his wife and kids. He's out there living in a tribal existence. He goes from Pharaoh's court, the most extravagant type of living that existed on the planet at the day, with everything, every service, every blessing bestowed on you, the most modern city on the planet, and he's a ruler in Egypt. And he goes from there to exile to being a sheep herder. He spent his first 40 years in Egypt and his second 40 years as a sheep herder in North Africa. And by the way, the 40...
But except for Jethro and his daughter that Moses married, that was a ruling class family over there too. And they
in that realm,
and
yes.
She was a priestess. And so that was like he went from one Pharaoh's court to another.
And got all the training, and it was a different type of experience, but royalty of a different sort. Yeah, absolutely. 1000%.
Isn't that
but
crazy?
The beauty, it is. And the beauty of Jethro is, here he is out in the Sinai when Pharaoh took the children of Israel and goes out into the Sinai, does this leaving Egypt and everything else. He has his family with him.
Right.
And his own family, including his father-in-law and other relatives. Right. And so his father-in-law pulls him aside and says, listen, Moses, you're being worn out. You're becoming frazzled from having to judge between every single dispute of the people. What you need to do is have one representative from each of the 12 families. Right. The 12 tribes, the 12 children of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. One representative of each family. They judge within their own family everything. And then if there's a matter
the basis for representative government, right?
That's right. That's right. And then if they can't solve it there, then they bring it to you. So they reduced the workload for Moses to a fraction of what it had been before. And they got to make the case, kind of the Supreme Court, if you will. But God's design for Israel wasn't to be ruled by a king. When Israel brought Saul into power, and then later David, it wasn't God's plan to have a king or a Cain over Israel. The people cried out for a Cain over them like all the other nations. That wasn't God's plan. God's plan was a representative government of judges. They left God's plan.
That's how it was in the temple, which they say that the temple was like pretty representative government and pretty representational, like kind of like the United States in its purest form of our purest form of government before it all got effed up, by
we got a hybrid. We got a hybrid of these things. We got a pharaoh and a representative situation with judges deciding between them. And
we got some bad, speaking of the reality of today, we have some very bad judges in a bad. It's just not working. Our whole judicial system, it's just not working. So I figure like Red October, that's scary about our judicial system making these mandates that people are going to have to obey, I guess, that are just, they're not even constitutional, but I guess they're going to enforce them or something. It's also scary. What a scary time.
He didn't want a king or a cane over his people. He wanted a judges to preside over the people. And so we've lost our way, or there was a losing of the way there. And of course, Moses. Yeah. Well, Moses.
How did we lose our way as horribly as we've lost it? How'd we end up here?
We're in an imperfect world. The people that put together our form of government, at the end of the day, there's this constitution, which is the contract between the people and its government, to control government, where the people control the government, not the government controlling the people. And what's happened in our current age right now is that the government has gotten out of step, and the people in power have made it a captured operation to do their will from a globalist perspective, not the will of the people, but the will of those who have captured control of the government. And so this moment we're in, this Red Sea moment, even right now, if I was going to say what's the direction that America's about to go here in this Red October, we're backed up against the Red Sea. It's blocking us. But what's it blocking us? Is it blocking us to our demise, where we now get mowed down by Pharaoh's chariots, by Pharaoh's mandates, by Pharaoh's rule?
By Pharaoh's technology?
Well, do we get mowed down like a chainsaw? Does it just come through our ranks? Or is this the moment? The interesting thing about Moses was he was really the commander in chief. He wasn't Pharaoh. He had been in Pharaoh's court. He was raised to be a Pharaoh, but the Pharaoh that was chasing them down was raised side by side with Moses. Right. They were both raised in Pharaoh's court. They both knew the magician's trick. That's why when Moses, when Pharaoh's advisors threw down their staves and they became snakes, that was magic. That was illusion. When Moses saw the trick, he'd been raised in the court, but he took it to the next level. He threw down his staff, and his snake ate all the other snakes of Pharaoh's advisors. And so they didn't have a staff. A staff was considered a symbol of rule. And so if you had a staff and it was marked correctly, if you waved your staff walking around Egypt, everybody knew, oh my gosh, it'd be like symbol of rank on your uniform, and you got instant respect because of your staff. When Pharaoh had his advisors throw down their staves, and they became snakes, and Moses's staff became a snake also and ate all the other snakes. It ate their symbols of power. It was like pulling the stripes off of your command there right in front of them. It was like breaking the sword on the deck of the Missouri, and embarrassed them all. And they didn't have their sign of power and position. And so Moses is out there at the edge of the sea, and the people are screaming at him like he's brought them there to be killed. And once he understands what he's supposed to do, once his mind clears, God says to him, why are you crying out to me? You're here at the edge of the Red Sea. The promised land's over there. The obstacle for you isn't the Egyptians, it's the sea. Command the sea to part. Command this mountain out of the way. And the sea becomes mountains to either sides. They pass through the center of this mountain of sea, and then it collapses in on the Egyptians. The very thing that's intended for us right now here in America, this Red Sea moment, with the collapse of the economy, with the collapse of the stock market, with the loss of your future retirement savings, with an economic crisis, with inflation going to the moon, with Red China threatening war over Taiwan, and every kind of disaster, all the gauges moving into the red zone. This moment isn't actually, it might look to the president, to the Pharaoh, like they've got us cornered and they're going to take us all out and we're all going to, expire here shortly in this chainsaw of shots. It might look that way, but the reality is this is not our annihilation moment. God, through Moses, told the people, all those people chasing you down right now in those chariots, not one of them will you ever see again after this day. And then Moses turns to the sea, raises his staff, it parts, they pass through it, the sea collapses in on them, and all of them die. And this moment for America is that kind of a moment. You're going to see that the very thing that was the obstacle, it collapses on them. We move forward. We're supposed to survive this. You were made for this day. This event, the people that are listening to you, Roseanne, are here for a reason. The people that are part of this conversation right now, the word to them is, don't be screaming and crying and moaning against Moses. It was God that brought us here. God that made us come to this moment at the edge of this Red Sea. For this exact time you were created to go take the possession. There's a bright day ahead. There's all sorts of things. There's going to be Nuremberg type trials for those people that tried to destroy us as a nation with this concocted moment. But it's like a jubilee moment. When Israel, in 1917, the land was set aside for Israel in the 1917 Balfour Declaration, between Lord Rothschild and Balfour, setting the land aside to buy up the land. 1967, 50 years later, the Jubilee year, Jerusalem was returned to the people in the 67 Six-Day War. This is the same thing here for America. We're in this war that was thrust upon us. We didn't ask for it. We didn't look for it, but we won't shirk away from it. We're going to have this engagement.
Was it entertaining?
But the way we're going to have it is by God. We're going through the Red Sea, and we're going to live, and we're going to see another day. Those that are pursuing us will not. That's this Red Sea moment.
Well, it seems that way because I was thinking about the Purim boomerang thing and about how 2016, after that election, boy, they kept on saying that Trump had colluded with Russia and blah, blah. He needed to get impeached, and everybody who helped him collude with Russia to steal the election, they needed to be arrested, and they even arrested a few. You remember that?
Oh, absolutely. And now the boomerang is, I love using that term, by the way. I got that from you. The boomerang is all those people that intended to take out Trump, all of their machinations, all their alliances, which were China-sided, are about to be exposed and are being exposed. They will fall into the pit that they dug.
That's right. That's exactly what it seems like. The pit they dug for Trump, saying he stole an election with Russia with $1,500 in Facebook ads. They brought Facebook into it, saying they stole the election with Russia, Facebook, and they dug that pit for Trump. And tried to, and they did arrest people. Roger Stone being one of them, and other people, and they did try to impeach him, and they did all of that stuff. And now look at there's the gallows there, and just seems like it. And then I was reading, hey, it says Purim was the Halloween of, the Purim is the Halloween of the Judaism.
Oh, I'm so glad you raised that.
Yeah, and then it went in my head. That's why I called you, because it went ba bing, ba bada bing, bada boom. And I went, oh, oh,
Well, okay,
oh.
so Roseanne, when you said
What?
that, that was so cool because, of course, what's the whole deal? We talked about this Esther moment, the boomerang, the flip. At the beginning of this season, Haman has hung on his own petard,
Right,
dies out in excruciating agony, screaming on the device that he created for Mordecai, and as a prelude to the destruction of the Jews.
right,
But the Purim day, the purge day, was still way off in the future.
right,
And so the actual combat, because at the time of the feast where Esther told the king that she was under a death sentence, at the actual feast, that's when Haman was killed. And then the king, after Haman was killed, talks with Mordecai and Esther, what can I do to stop this? Because he's king, he can't reverse a ruling because he's considered to be infallible.
yeah,
So he
because he's
can't,
Roman. People keep hiding that, but he's Roman.
yeah, Roman, Persian, that extrapolation of those
Right,
empires.
right,
And so he can't reverse a ruling. What he does is he amends it, he adds
right,
to it, and he says, okay, the day is still on, nothing's changed, I'm still king, but the Jews can also arm themselves and make alliances.
right,
And so they spend the rest of that season, that year, preparing for the battle. They make alliances. Look, we do business together. We got fields together. We got kids together, whatever. Uh, let's be friends. If Haman's kids, his 10 sons, are going to come for us, we'll work together to defend ourselves. We have shared interests, joint interests. Uh, can we come up with a contract, a deal? And so, one of the things that you've shared that I had not heard this before was that when Haman's 10 sons came to attack Israel on the Purim Purge day,
mm-hmm.
that in the telling of the story, when in Jewish households they go through this Purim moment every year, it's said that Haman's 10 sons all died in the same breath on the
Right,
Purim day. And
right,
that Purim day is this Halloween day. In the Catholic Church, All Saints Day is November 1st.
mm-hmm.
All Souls Day is November 2nd. And on the numbers, those are also relevant because 11 is the number of war. It's the number of
Right,
discord. Uh, and so 111 or 11 111 is this war number. And then uh, uh, 11 2 or 2 times 11 22. There's all sorts of symbology involved in that. And that's the split. And in All Souls Day, that's the day when the divide comes. Those souls are sent to hell or to heaven, depending on their actions all through this life. That's the judgment day, if you will. In the
and
occult,
11:3
yes.
in the law of war is the day when the sovereign power gets to kick out the occupying power, and it's also my birthday, which is really cool because I said last year everybody wants to know what to give me for my birthday, and I said I think you know what to give me on election day. And so then I was bummed out that they prevented me from having my birthday present, but I think I'm still going to get it a little bit later, just like Esther did.
That's exactly, boy, that is so right. I forgot about that part of our conversation, but that's true. By the way, uh, this in the occult, the way that they prepare victims for sacrifice is by terrorizing them, by adrenalizing them, because they drink the blood. And so they adrenalize them, and then it makes the blood give them certain effects like a drug, a high. And so they take days doing that. In this reversal, in this boomerang, watch what happens and think about that as these people who've been terrorizing the country, terrorizing the world by their actions. That which they dug for everyone else turns back on them, and the timing and the days. There was going to be some symbology there. And by the way, that 11:3, when was the reversal on that? 3:11. Stand by, enjoy the show. What you'll learn down the road is going to be amazing.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Boy, it was about 10 levels deep. I loved it, of course. I love all those levels. And thanking, I was going to start out with a prayer to, because I feel like, well, we need to start doing that to ask God's protection from the enemy when we start talking, and when we start sharing ideas about God and the good stuff. We got to ask for protection. But I felt it all through this convo, and it was wonderful to talk with you, and a lot of good info there. When we were talking about the Red Sea and the splitting of the Red Sea, I was saying that some people, I've heard them talk about splitting of the Red Sea actually being the human blood, and the splitting of the Red Sea being coming back to be about herd immunity, or coming to that, the blood doing its job that it's supposed to do before bad stuff is entered into it. A healing coming.
Well, again, there's this baptism, passing through what is symbolic of death with the water. The symbology going back to Noah and the flood, and even the pre-Adamic period, where there was a flood before Adam, where there was civilization on Earth, but they were the pre-Adamites, some prior civilization. And that's where we go into this Plato's discourses about that era. And of course, that's the stuff it's harder conversation to get into, but it's very interesting that when God gave the rainbow, it was because there had been cloud or a dew cover over the whole earth. There wasn't weather patterns like we have today, and the earth was watered by a mist that came up morning and evening.
The dew.
The dew. And then after the flood, you had a weather pattern with clouds, and that's when the rainbow was brought in. And then God promised he would never again destroy the earth by water, purge the earth or whatever. And it was a promise not just to mankind, not just to Noah, but to all living things. God made the promise to all living things that he would never destroy the earth by flood again. And so, but there's this passing through the water that is symbolic of through, the hands of death and surviving. That's this Red Sea thing. That's what we're coming to for America. We're right up against the Red Sea, but everything they had planned against us, everything in this moment that was intended for our destruction, is in fact going to boomerang, to be a reversal, to be a flip, and will come on those who intended ill against God's people. And we as God's people, as this nation, under some divine hand, even if our detractors don't see it and don't understand it and think that they can get a hold of us, those of us that are looking to God for our salvation, who understand our heritage as a people, the pilgrims that came here to seek a place where they could worship God freely, and not be under the hand of these blood right to rule Canaanites. They might not believe that we're still here. God's about to show them. And I believe after this death angel that's hovering over America and over the world with the fallout from this shot and the damage from this shot, that new technologies that actually already exist, will be allowed to come to the fore, come to fruition, to help with the repair of the heart muscles, repair of the lung muscles, repair and dissolving of the clots that were intended against his people. That there is going to be an amazing revival in America and a turning towards God in the aftermath of this Jubilee year, which ends next March. And we will regain control in the country. The end won't be for everyone. There's losses along the way, and it's horrible. But those of us that keep our eyes on God, stay pure, including in the blood, will be part of the revolution, the pushback against those who would bring us back into slavery or keep us in slavery, to free our country, to worship God, to be his servants, and make this place the promised land.
That's right.
It was always intended to be.
That's
Reagan in
to
his
love
speech,
each other, free of fear, so that we can love each other.
Well, Reagan in his speech, A Time for Choosing, which was really the beginning of his political career, 1964, amazing speech. He talked about the Cuban who had come here to escape communism and Castro. And there was a conversation happening, and people were talking about the communization of America, this red tide that was taking over America back in that era. And the Cuban turns to the others and he says, "But you don't understand. When I came here from Cuba, at least I had some place to go to escape communism, to escape the slavery of that communistic rule. If America falls, where can we go?" And that's why we as a people have to push back, stand. When we get to the other side of the sea, all this that was intended against us, Nuremberg trials against those who tried to take us out. We will survive this. We will move forward. We will be the shining light to the world. We will do what God intended us to do. Even if it's, the road is not going to be easy, even after this Jubilee year. We have work to do. But we will survive this. God, please, in your heaven, hear our prayer. And with that, Roseanne, let's say a prayer together. Before we end, Father God, we thank you for all of your blessings. We thank you for your protections. We thank you for your fire by night, your cloud of pillar by day to protect us. We ask you for divine guidance in the path ahead, to understand how to proceed forward, to choose life over death, to choose justice over evil, and to fulfill, according to your command, your wishes, your directive, this direction for America to be prosperous, to be a light to the world, to proliferate, to have children and children and children and children and children that worship you and look to you and are a blessing to you and to the world. We ask you for protection in this exact moment, and we ask you for guidance for our leader and leaders as we look not to our enemy and their destructive power, but to your blessing, the dividing of the sea, the dry ground, and the ability for us to pass through this crisis in one piece and survived to the other side, and the destruction of those who sought evil against us. I thank you for Roseanne and for her friendship and for her insights. And I ask you to bless her and give her long, long life where we get many more of these conversations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want, and I say amen. And for you, I thank God for you too, as a good friend and a shining light that we all will look to. We look to you. And thank you for your answers that you've given so many of us. We look to you. I wanted to say about the Purim thing. Here you go, cut to right after the Nuremberg laws that you talked about, when they hung 10, when they killed Haman's 10 sons. Cut to Nuremberg, 10 Nazis were hung, and Julius Streicher was one of them. And as he approached his death, it's in the papers and you can Google it. Nobody believes it, but it is. You can Google it. He yelled out, "Purim Fest, 1948." So wow. I don't have any doubt that God is here, is in control, and will again bring us a Purim Fest for America, because this is the place where people fled to, and is still the place where people flee to, and it must remain. And the government of, by, and for the people must remain. So amen to all that, and thank you. And Shabbat Shalom tonight. It's a big one. But anyway, I don't know when this will air, but it was a good one. We'll do it again. We'll do it again.
Roseanne, I love you.
Yeah,
and
you too,
I'm looking forward. You've got the travel restrictions that make it so hard to get over there, and have one of the people. In fact, nobody knows this, but by the time this is out, it probably will be public knowledge. We have a airing date for the Sound of Freedom, and that's going to be public. And then the other thing, by the way, too.
Are you going to give it out or what? You're not.
I'm not going to give it out. Well, I'll let that be made public, but it is in February. And then the other thing is,
great. People need to see that movie. It's going to blow everybody's minds, and talk about people finally getting the truth and crossing over to the other side. I can't wait till people see it, because it's part of splitting the consciousness open that allows us to get to the other side.
Well, it's coming at a very precise date that is intended to be there as a lot of these revelations are coming forward. And so I think it's very important now that we have a release date, general release for the Sound of Freedom. But by the way, anybody that says you can buy the movie online or whatever, that's a scam going on. You can see the trailer. There's no movie for sale online. Don't act like you can give a credit card and do that. It's
going to be in real movie theaters, right?
Real movie theaters. Yes, it's going to be very widely released. Large number of movie theaters. I think it's going to be the biggest movie in history. But
oh my God, I would love that. We'll have to put our mind to making that happen. That's cool.
We'll work more on that when we get closer.
Okay.
The other thing is, there's an event in Las Vegas, and I know you don't really want to travel. I wish you could be there, because it's going to be the one to remember. People for a very long time after this are going to be, oh my gosh, I had to be there. I can't believe it. I wish I'd been there. Don't be on the outside. The Patriot Double Down in Las Vegas on October 22nd through 25th. It's actually 23rd to 20th. Yeah, this year, just a couple weeks away now. If you got the chance to be there, you better be there, because it'll be the one everybody's going, oh my gosh. I can't tell you everything, but there's announcements to come. Probably by the time this is out, one of them will be public, but I can't say anything prematurely. But they have guests that are going to be there that are going to really knock your socks off. So if you have the chance to get pockets before they're all gone, be at the Patriot Double Down. And then some of that will be live streamed over at 107 Daily. So anyway, just an aside. if people are close enough by, they can get to it. They better get to it. But there's only so many tickets, and then they're done. It's not a huge event, but it will be the one to remember post everything that's coming. So anyway, Roseanne, love you. Look forward to talking again. Let's do this more often.
Yeah,
and
love it.
I just appreciate you coming on and doing this together.
Yeah, can't wait to show it.
All right.
All right.
Talk soon.
Adios, pal. See ya.
All right. Bye.